In today's video, we're going to talk about Brazilian urbanization, covering both historical and contemporary aspects. This is to help you understand the process clearly and visually, just as you're used to on the channel. So let's get into the video. Hey guys, how's it going? I'm Paulo, your geography teacher. As always, it's an honor to have you here with me on Geo Ilustrada, and in today's video, Brazilian urbanization. Well, let's start by giving a little historical context, and for that, let's go back a bit in time. As you know, colonization here in the Americas had different characteristics. That is, in North America, especially in the United States, colonization was focused on settlement, unlike what happened here in South America, where colonization had an exploitative character. That is, to exploit all its natural resources and take them to Europe. And in Brazil's case, it was no different. That's why our urbanization at first happened within a peripheral colonial framework through an export-oriented agrarian model. Because of this, the first urban centers here in Brazil were established in port cities, like São Vicente in Salvador. This was precisely to make it easier to transport these products to Europe. Another important factor is that since the beginning of colonization, Brazil has always had a predominantly agrarian economy, mainly based on large landholdings. You know, on large estates and slave labor. And these characteristics, combined with the low purchasing power of free workers, inhibited the creation of a domestic consumer market and the very development of cities. Largely because of this, it is said that until approximately the end of the 18th century, there was very little urban infrastructure in Brazil. This only began to change with the arrival of the Portuguese royal family here in the country. That's when infrastructure and leisure projects began to be developed, such as paving, lighting, squares, theaters, among others. However, folks, even though the arrival of the royal family was important for the creation of some urban infrastructure in the country, it's only in the 20th century that we actually see massive urbanization here in Brazil. But before we get into that, I'd like to talk about 2 points that were very important in creating the conditions for Brazil to industrialize. And the first of them was the abolition of slavery in Brazil. As you know, this happened in the year 1888, and this happened with the main goal of creating a domestic consumer market in the country. Yeah, it wasn't out of kindness, you know. Were there bigger interests behind it? So, with the end of slavery, wage laborers started to appear in the country, and this type of worker consumes, right? Unlike the enslaved people. Because of that, the domestic consumer market is created, and cities in Brazil also start to become more dynamic. And the second point concerns the importance of coffee within the Brazilian economy, especially at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, when coffee became the main driver of Brazilian urbanization. Because the accumulation of capital from coffee created the economic conditions for the acceleration of industrial development. This development, we must mention, happened on a large scale here in Brazil in the 1930s during the beginning of the so-called Vargas era, which was mainly marked by large state investments in infrastructure projects that made possible the circulation and consumption of goods from the emerging industry. And the combination of these factors also leads to urban development in the country. This happened both because of the infrastructure projects that were created, and because cities became more attractive, and because of the mass migration of people from rural areas to the city. What are we going to talk about now? But first, check out our Geo Illustrated Mind Maps kit featuring all Geo Ilustrada videos in the form of mind maps to make your studies easier and more dynamic. The link is here in the video description, okay? I left it there for a friendly price, just $49.90, so check it out, and if it makes sense for you, go ahead and get it, all right? That way you'll strengthen your studies and also support this channel. So let's get to the end of the video, all right? Now let's talk about rural exodus, which is this migration of people from the countryside to the city. And it happened here in Brazil more strongly between the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s approximately. And this happens due to 2 main factors. The first is the advance of industrialization, which I just mentioned, and the second is the modernization of the countryside and land concentration in large estates, which makes it difficult for peasants to find work or even to farm their own land, thus driving this migration from the countryside to the cities. So everyone, Within everything we've discussed in this video so far, there's a triad that we can't lose sight of. When it comes to Brazil's urbanization, it's the inherent relationship between urbanization, industrialization, and rural exodus. But what do you mean, Professor? Pay attention. Industrialization favors the creation of urban infrastructure projects and at the same time generates jobs in the cities, thus attracting people to fill these job openings. This helps to drive rural exodus, that is, the mass migration of people from the countryside to the city. This also strengthens the process of urbanization in Brazil. So notice how these three processes are extremely interconnected. And about that, take a look at this graph here, which shows the increase of the urban population in Brazil. And according to it, we can see that Brazil truly becomes an urban country. Only in the 1970s, that is, it was in this decade that the urban population surpassed the rural population. Here in Brazil, however, all this urbanization also brought some negative aspects, and that's what we're going to talk about now briefly before we wrap up the video, okay? So stay strong, everyone. And regarding these problems, you can't lose sight of the fact that this major urban expansion happened without proper planning. And that's where the problems come from. The first of these is that this growth was concentrated, and this concentration happened mainly in two cities, São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. And the second is that these cities didn't have the capacity to absorb all this urban population. In other words, many people were coming without the city having adequate infrastructure to accommodate them. All this influx of people sounded great, right? But anyway, this will lead to what's called an urban infrastructure deficit, meaning many people living in precarious conditions, right? In precarious housing, as well as socio-spatial segregation and the growth of slums, which are striking characteristics, right? In both cities I mentioned, both São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. I hope you enjoyed the video. There are additional videos on your screen. Don't forget to check out the Geo Illustrata mind maps. Leave a like and a comment to support us. See you next time. Bye-bye.